Chapter 342. The 9 Great Forbidden Lands. The 100th level of the 3,000 illusions. The white-browed old man's essence soul looked at Su Qin, who had broken through the layers of illusions and arrived at the 100th level with unstoppable power. How did you get here so quickly? The white-browed old man couldn't believe it. The reason why he got to the 100th level so quickly was that he had read the information about the 3,000 illusions left behind by his sacred land. He knew how to break through the first 100 levels of illusions as quickly as possible. Otherwise, even if the first 100 levels of the 3,000 illusions were not dangerous to Earth Immortals, ordinary Earth Immortals would need to spend decades to figure it out. Even if there was no danger, it didn't mean that one could get through it quickly. The layers of illusions in the 3,000 illusions required a lot of time to comprehend before one could get out. But now, the old man with white eyebrows watched Su Qin step through the layers of illusions as if there was no one there. He even tore a big hole in the 100th layer of the illusions and came here with great strength. It was simply shocking. I've finally found you. Su Qin saw the stunned white-browed old man and didn't attack immediately. Since he was here, it meant that the white-browed old man had nowhere to go. Therefore, after Su Qin glanced at the white-browed old man, he turned to look at the human dynasty created by the 100th level of illusions with interest. It's a god. A god has come to the world. Countless people of the human dynasty created by the illusions looked at Su Qin standing in the sky with fanaticism. A large number of them even knelt down and kept kowtowing. Although these people were created by the illusions and were not real living beings, they didn't know their own nature. The illusions gave them all their memories and experiences, so these people already had spiritual intelligence. The supreme expert who left behind the 3,000 illusions in this forbidden land is really unimaginable in terms of essence soul. Even Su Qin was quite emotional at this moment. This was only the 100th level of the illusion, and there were already such lifelike creatures in the illusion. If it was the later levels, the 1,000th, 2,000th, and even the 3,000th, wouldn't it be no different from the real world? What a pity! No matter how realistic it is, it's still an illusion. In the depths of Su Qin's pupils, an indescribable whirlpool was spinning. He gently raised his right hand, then waved his sleeve. In an instant, the entire illusory realm was torn apart, and the vast human kingdom collapsed in an instant. Countless illusory creatures turned into nothingness. At this moment, Taiyin Fairy's figure appeared behind Su Qin, staggering in her steps. If Taiyin Fairy were to challenge the 3,000 illusion arrays alone, she definitely wouldn't be able to reach the 100th level so quickly. However, Taiyin Fairy was following behind Su Qin. Along the way, Su Qin broke through the layers of illusions. Taiyin Fairy took advantage of this opportunity to carefully follow behind Su Qin through the gaps between the illusions. Even so, when Taiyin Fairy entered the 100th level of the illusion, she was instantly trapped. If Su Qin hadn't broken the 100th level of the illusion with a wave of his hand, Taiyin Fairy would probably still be thinking about how to break through the array. When the white-browed elder heard how Taiyin Fairy addressed Su Qin, his pupils suddenly shrank. He couldn't believe it. Taiyin Fairy, what did you just say? One had to know that Taiyin Fairy was the saintess-to-be of the Taiyin Holy Land. Her status was only below the Saint Lord and the Grand Elders of the Holy Land. The reason why Taiyin Fairy came to the human world with them this time was mainly because the Taiyin token was too important. The Taiyin Holy Land didn't feel at ease to give this treasure to other disciples. However, what the white-browed elder didn't expect was that Taiyin Fairy would actually let Su Qin be her master at this moment. She was willing to become a servant? Taiyin Fairy glanced at the white-browed elder coldly. She didn't even bother to explain. The white-browed elder's primordial spirit had escaped too early. He only knew that Su Qin was powerful and could defeat 5 spirit-severing realm earth deities. He might have already entered the true realm. Although true realm earth deities were terrifying, there were still experts of this level in many holy lands within the immortal sect. Taiyin Fairy's status as the saintess-to-be was even higher than ordinary true realm earth deities. This was also the reason why the white-browed elder found it unbelievable. However, what the white-browed elder didn't know was that after he escaped from Kunlun Mountain with his primordial spirit, Su Qin used the second style of the Buddha's palm to cut off the void. This directly made Taiyin Fairy believe that Su Qin was a direct descendant of a supreme expert. In fact, if the white-browed elder knew about this, he wouldn't be too surprised that Taiyin Fairy had recognized Su Qin as her master. Within the Immortal sect, there were many descendants of supreme experts. However, there were only a few direct descendants who could awaken their bloodline and inherit some of the supreme expert's abilities. As for any direct descendant of a supreme expert, as long as there was enough time, they would be able to stand at the top of the Immortal sect sooner or later. Even an old monster at the peak of the divine ruin realm would have to bow down to them. Master, do you need me to do it? Taiyin Fairy didn't plead for mercy for the white-browed elder. Instead, she took the initiative to kill the white-browed elder. Taiyin Fairy's words made the white-browed elder's expression change drastically. At this moment, he also realized that he was in danger. He quickly bowed to Su Qin and begged for mercy. "Senior, please spare my life. I'm also willing to submit to you." "No need." Su Qin shook his head slightly. The white-browed elder was only left with his primordial spirit body. If he really accepted him, Su Qin would have to find a suitable body for him. This was too troublesome. As soon as Su Qin finished speaking, a huge sun was faintly burning in the depths of his eyes. Then, bright golden flames filled Su Qin's eyes. In the end, they spurted out and directly enveloped the white-browed elder. In less than a moment, as the white-browed elder wailed, his primordial spirit body was completely burned. This is a divine power. It's definitely a divine power. Taiyin Fairy, who was next to him, clearly felt the horror of the golden flames. Her body trembled, and there was only one thought left in her mind. If it was before, when Su Qin used the golden eyes of the sun to burn the burly man's primordial spirit, Taiyin Fairy was only guessing and wasn't very sure. But now, after Su Qin used the golden eyes of the sun again, Taiyin Fairy was very sure that Su Qin used the golden eyes of the sun at such a close distance. No matter what move or killing move it was, when it was used, it would inevitably need to mobilize one's true essence or the power of the primordial spirit. However, Su Qin's golden flames just now ignited out of thin air. Before that, Taiyin Fairy couldn't feel any fluctuations of the primordial spirit, and the only thing that could do this was a divine ability. Legend had it that divine power wasn't a killing move. It was more like a kind of talent that could be mastered by the spirit. It didn't need the primordial spirit to be used. In a flash, Taiyin Fairy's thoughts fluctuated, and she became more and more respectful. Generally speaking, even the direct bloodline descendants of the strongest could only inherit a certain ability of the strongest. But so far, Su Qin has shown more than one kind of secret art. First, this was a divine power that obviously belonged to the fire element. Second, it was a means of controlling the partition of space. Su Qin naturally didn't know what Taiyin Fairy was thinking. After he killed the white-browed elder's primordial spirit, he once again looked into the depths of the 3,000 illusory realms. Now, he was already in the 100th level of the illusory realm. If he continued to go deeper, he would be in the illusory realms beyond the 100th level. The power of the illusory realms in the 3,000 illusory realms increases every 100 levels. But with Master's ability, the first 2,000 levels shouldn't be a problem. You even have a chance to pass through the 3,000th level of the illusory realm, Taiyin Fairy said respectfully. Pass through the 3,000th level of the illusory realm? Su Qin shook his head slightly. The horror of the 3,000 illusory realms was definitely far beyond Taiyin Fairy's imagination. Even if Su Qin used the Eye of Truth to observe, he could only see through the 1,000th level of the illusory realm. As for the illusory realms beyond the 1,000th level, even the Eye of Truth couldn't see through them. This was very terrifying. The Eye of Truth could observe the chi movement of heaven and earth. Even the illusory realms were no exception. But now, the Eye of Truth had lost its effect. Of course, this was because Su Qin's strength was too weak. He was only in the spirit-severing realm and couldn't unleash the true power of the Eye of Truth. But even so, it showed how terrifying the 1000th level of the illusory realm was. Su Qin had a cautious personality and wouldn't put himself in danger. Even if he had the Buddha golden body in the depths of his ancestral aperture and could ignore all primordial spirit killer moves, this could only ensure that Su Qin wouldn't die under primordial spirit killer moves. If a certain illusory realm after the 1000th level didn't have any lethality and only trapped Su Qin for a few hundred years, this would be a heavy loss for Su Qin. Being trapped in one place for a few hundred years was equivalent to making Su Qin unable to sign in everywhere. Although Su Qin left 2 incarnations outside, how could the strength of the incarnations compare to Su Qin's original body? Some places with rich Dao accumulation were extremely dangerous. No matter how many incarnations there were, they couldn't enter. Therefore, after sensing the possible danger after the 1000th level of the illusory realm, Su Qin didn't plan to continue. Not to mention whether he could pass through the 3000th level of the illusory realm. Even if he really passed through it, he would only obtain the inheritance of a certain supreme expert. And for Su Qin, this was what he didn't lack the most. However, this 3000 illusory realm is after the 9 great forbidden lands. It was famous even in the previous Vitality Tide era. There must be a lot of Dao accumulation, enough for me to sign in. Su Qin's heart suddenly palpitated. Although he didn't plan to continue because there would be danger later, he could still sign in before this place. Thinking of this, Su Qin looked around again. After confirming that there was no danger, he said in his heart, "System, sign in here." Congratulations to the host for signing in successfully. Obtained the primordial spirit killer move, Abyss of Darkness. A cold, mechanical voice suddenly sounded in Su Qin's ears. Primordial spirit killer move? Abyss of Darkness? In a trance, Su Qin felt as if he was in a vast world, and in the center of the world stood a white-haired man in white. His eyes were deep, and there seemed to be a vast world in the depths of his pupils. Even Su Qin felt his primordial spirit begin to tremble the moment he looked at the white-haired man in white. Chapter 343. After a while, Su Qin opened his eyes and muttered to himself, "So this is Abyss of Darkness?" Abyss of Darkness was an extremely terrifying primordial spirit killer move. Primordial spirit killer moves were formless and intangible. They were known for being strange and unpredictable. Abyss of Darkness was even more so. For example, when Su Qin used Abyss of Darkness to look at the enemy's consciousness would fall into darkness and lose the ability to resist. If the primordial spirit's level was too low, the enemy's primordial spirit might directly disintegrate. Of course, the higher the opponent's level, the stronger the primordial spirit and the stronger the resistance. With this primordial spirit killer move, I can save a lot of trouble in the future. Su Qin smiled in satisfaction. If Lei Xuanzi appeared in front of him now, Su Qin only needed to use the primordial spirit killer move, Abyss of Darkness, to look at Lei Xuanzi and the other party would fall into darkness. Su Qin did not even need to make a move. Because Lei Xuanzi had just become an earth immortal and was at the initial stage of the spirit-severing stage, his primordial spirit was far inferior to Su Qin, who was at the peak of the spirit-severing stage. Moreover, the most terrifying thing about the primordial spirit killer move, Abyss of Darkness, was that it was not only useful against experts below Su Qin's level, even if they were at the same level as Su Qin, or even stronger than Su Qin, this killer move could restrict part of the enemy's consciousness. "Master, are you all right?" At this moment, Tai Yin Fairy looked at Su Qin cautiously. After Su Qin killed the white-browed old man's primordial spirit with the great sun golden pupil, he had been standing there. Tai Yin Fairy thought that Su Qin had discovered something and raised her head to look at Su Qin. However, Tai Yin Fairy's gaze met with Su Qin's eyes. At that instant, Tai Yin Fairy only felt that she had seen a dark and deep world. This world seemed to be filled with a fatal attraction to her. Tai Yin Fairy could not help but sink into it. "Come back." Just as Tai Yin Fairy's consciousness was completely submerged, she heard a voice that sounded like a thunderclap. Taiyin Fairy was immediately pulled out from the dark abyss. What happened to me? Cold sweat kept appearing on Taiyin Fairy's smooth forehead. Although Taiyin Fairy didn't know what had happened, she realized that if it wasn't for that voice, her consciousness would have been completely obliterated. Master? That pair of deep eyes suddenly appeared in Taiyin Fairy's mind. She couldn't help but shiver. It seems that I have underestimated this primordial spirit killer move. Su Qin observed Taiyin Fairy's reaction and pondered. Originally, Su Qin thought that this primordial spirit killer move was a great killer move to deal with group attacks. Even if he was surrounded by a group of land immortals, as long as he used this killer move, no matter how many land immortals there were, they would be defeated. But Taiyin Fairy, although Taiyin Fairy's strength hadn't reached the peak of the spirit-severing stage, she was very close. Even Taiyin Fairy couldn't withstand the dark abyss. In the end, if Su Qin didn't hold back in time, her primordial spirit would have collapsed. One could imagine the power of this killer move. Of course, this might be because Taiyin Fairy didn't guard against Su Qin at all. But no matter what, he was able to silently subdue a land immortal who was close to the peak of the spirit-severing stage. But no matter what, the power of this primordial spirit killer move had already surprised Su Qin. This primordial spirit killer move should be the ultimate skill of the owner of the 3,000 illusions. Su Qin touched his chin and guessed. He still remembered that when the system instilled this primordial spirit killer move, Su Qin's mind faintly entered a vast illusory world. And in the middle of the world stood a white-clothed, white-haired man. A supreme expert of the primordial spirit lineage. Su Qin sighed in his heart. He stopped thinking about it and continued to familiarize himself with the dark abyss. Su Qin continued to stay in the 3,000 illusions for a few more days. He even went deep into the 1,000th level of the 3,000 illusions and tried to continue signing in. After all, the primordial spirit killer move, Dark Abyss, had given Su Qin an advantage. With such a powerful killer move, even if there were another 100 of them, Su Qin wouldn't mind. However, to Su Qin's disappointment, it seemed that the Dark Abyss that he had signed in had exhausted the Dao accumulation on the island. I might have to pass through the 3,000 illusions and enter the deepest core of the island before I can continue to sign in. Su Qin stood on the 1,000th level of the illusion and thought silently in his heart. Su Qin had signed in for decades. Of course, he knew that even in the same place, there were only a few places where he could sign in. For example, the Shaolin Temple covered an area of dozens of miles, but the places where Su Qin signed in were only the Scripture Pavilion and the Bodhi Court. And this 3,000 Illusions Island was probably the same. Su Qin's first sign-in was equivalent to signing in all the Dao accumulation on the periphery of the island. The remaining Dao accumulation was hidden deeper. If Su Qin wanted to continue signing in, he would have to go deeper into the 3,000 illusions. To me, the primordial spirit killer move is just an additional method. It's not necessary. There's no need to take the risk of going deeper into the 3,000 illusions. Su Qin thought for a while and gave up on the idea of going deeper into the 3,000 illusions. If Su Qin was trapped in a certain illusion for hundreds of years because of this, wouldn't the gains not make up for the losses? Although the primordial spirit killer move was strange and unpredictable and could kill people without leaving a trace, Su Qin didn't have to use it. The killer move, Dark Abyss, was enough for Su Qin. I'll come in and take a look when I become a supreme expert in the future. Su Qin made up his mind. And just as Su Qin was pondering, Taiyin Fairy, who had been following behind Su Qin, felt her heart trembling. This is the 1,000th layer of the illusion. Taiyin Fairy looked around and swallowed her saliva. Even in the previous Vitality Tide era, only Earth Immortals at the peak of the true realm had a chance of reaching the 1,000th layer of the illusion. As for those below the true realm, they would stop at 400 or 500 layers at most. Could it be that Master's strength is at the peak of the true realm? Taiyin Fairy couldn't help but think. The true realm and the peak of the true realm were two completely different concepts. Originally, Taiyin Fairy thought that Su Qin was at most at the true realm, but she didn't expect him to be at the peak of the true realm. Even in the many holy lands of the immortal sects, the peak of the true realm was second only to the Holy Lord and a few Grand Supremes. It was enough to look down on a region. If Su Qin knew what Tai Yin Fairy was thinking, he would probably smile indifferently. The reason why Su Qin could easily pass the 1000th layer of the illusion was not because he had the strength of the peak of the true realm, but because he used the Eye of Truth to observe and ignore all primordial spirit killer moves. The Eye of Truth observed the flaws in each layer of the illusion, but Su Qin relied on the primordial spirit killer move to force his way through. It was because of these two methods that Su Qin could reach the 1000th layer of the illusion in just a few days. However, this was also Su Qin's limit. If he went any deeper, even if Su Qin could ignore all primordial spirit killer moves, he might be trapped in a certain layer of the illusion. Of course, although Su Qin was not at the peak of the true realm, in Su Qin's eyes, it was only a matter of time before he stepped into the peak of the true realm. As long as Su Qin stepped into the true realm, he could use countless methods and trump cards to fight against the peak of the true realm. All right, let's go back. Su Qin glanced at Tai Yin Fairy and directly turned to leave the 3000 Illusion Island. Now that the white-browed elder's primordial spirit had fallen, and Su Qin had obtained the primordial spirit killer move, Abyss of Darkness, from signing in on the 3000 Illusion Island, he had gained a lot and naturally should return. Just as Su Qin brought Tai Yin Fairy back to Chang'an City. Inside the immortal sect, clouds and mist. Extremely dense primordial qi and spiritual vigor filled the air. On a divine mountain that looked like a heavenly saber, more than 10 figures sat cross-legged. The life fire of the disciple that my heavenly saber mountain sent into the human world has extinguished. The heavenly saber mountain master was a very ordinary middle-aged man. He wore a gray robe, but the saber aura between his brows seemed to be able to cut the world apart. As one of the 6 sacred grounds of the immortal sect, Heavenly Saber Mountain was an orthodoxy left behind by a supreme expert. Not only did they have the supreme expert's life treasure, but they also had more than one overlord of the divine ruin realm. His life fire extinguished? The elders of Heavenly Saber Mountain looked at each other. In their opinion, after more than 10,000 years of primordial qi in the human world, it had probably declined to the extreme and could not produce any experts. The disciple they sent was a mid-stage spirit severing stage Earth immortal. Logically speaking, even if he could not dominate the human world, at least he should not have died. How are the disciples of the other sacred grounds? A Heavenly Saber Mountain elder on the left thought for a while and asked. Other than the disciple of Tai Yin's sacred ground, the life fire of all the disciples of the other sacred grounds has extinguished, the Heavenly Saber Mountain master said indifferently. To a sacred ground like Heavenly Saber Mountain, the death of an Earth immortal disciple was a little painful, but it was not unacceptable. However, what the Heavenly Saber Mountain master cared about was what the human world was like now. What happened? Why did their disciple die? The disciple of Tai Yin's sacred ground had the Tai Yin token and activated it to save his life. It's understandable, but the other disciples, the Heavenly Saber Mountain elders, were puzzled. It seems that something big has happened in the human world. After a long while, the Heavenly Saber Mountain master said slowly, I'll discuss this with the other sacred grounds and see if we should use that treasure. The Heavenly Saber Mountain master's eyes flashed. That treasure? The expressions of the Heavenly Saber Mountain elders changed slightly, but they did not refute. Almost all the disciples sent by the other sacred grounds to the human world had died. This made the other sacred grounds feel uneasy. Even if they had to pay a certain price, they had to understand the current situation in the human world. At the same time, Su Qin and Tai Yin Fairy finally returned to Chang'an City after several hours of traveling. Familiarize yourself with it first. Su Qin left Tai Yin Fairy in the East Palace and asked the old man Fei Yu to introduce some of the rules of the palace to Tai Yin Fairy. Then, he returned to the black majestic underground hall. Since the War God Temple is back, Su Qin sat cross-legged and raised his right hand. A majestic palace hovered above his hand. Next, it's time to cultivate the War God Catalog. Su Qin's expression changed. His mind quickly sank into the 49 void relief sculptures. Chapter 344. War God Catalog. Bits and pieces of information about the War God Catalog quickly appeared in Su Qin's mind. The supreme expert who created the War God Temple, Ho Yuan, accidentally obtained 49 void relief sculptures when he was traveling in the void outside the realm. As for these 49 relief sculptures, they were the Battle God Catalog. However, the War God Catalog was too obscure and difficult to understand. Even someone as powerful as Ho Yuan found it difficult to comprehend it. However, he sensed that the void relief sculptures weren't simple. They might represent some powerful and unknown inheritance. Hence, he specially preserved the void relief sculptures and placed them in the War God Temple. They would appear every few thousand years so that countless geniuses in the future could comprehend the 49 void relief sculptures together. This was also the origin of the War God Temple. Unfortunately, after such a long time, coupled with the fact that the War God Temple was hidden in the depths of the void and had experienced several void storms, the 49 void relief sculptures inside were severely damaged, and there were even fractures. Under such circumstances, not to mention the War God Catalog being obscure and difficult to understand, even a normal divine art would be difficult to cultivate. If Su Qin hadn't signed in at the War God Temple and directly obtained the complete War God Catalog, this incredible inheritance would have been lost. The War God Catalog isn't a divine art manual, nor is it an essence soul killer move. Su Qin carefully comprehended the War God Catalog. This inheritance that even supreme experts couldn't comprehend was as easy as flipping his palm for Su Qin after the system instilled it into him. It's an ultimate technique for cultivating a domain, Su Qin muttered to himself. The so-called domain was a special domain formed by a martial artist continuously compressing the power of heaven and earth. Ordinary peak mythical legends had the ability to condense a domain. However, if one wanted to cultivate the War God Catalog, they had to at least raise their domain to the phenomenal stage. As for the phenomenal stage, only after becoming an Earth Immortal could one have a chance of reaching it. In other words, this War God Catalog was an ultimate technique that only Earth Immortals could cultivate. After entering the Earth Immortal realm, my miniature domain naturally evolved into a phenomenal stage domain after being replenished by the Sea of Essence Qi. I reached the bottom line of cultivating the War God Catalog. Su Qin's curiosity grew. According to the information left behind by the supreme expert Ho Yuan, this Battle God Catalog had never appeared in the mortal world before. It was an item from the outer realm and was extremely mysterious. Su Qin didn't suspect that this secret technique had been left behind by some powerful figure. Since the system gave him this secret technique, it meant that it wouldn't harm him at all. Su Qin just needed to cultivate it without worry. Through the War God Catalog, I can transform my domain into the War God domain. And the War God domain is above all domains in the world. Su Qin slowly comprehended the War God Catalog, and a trace of doubt appeared on his face. This divine battle catalog is enough for Ho Yuan, a supreme expert, to forge the divine battle hall at a great cost just to preserve it. Could it be that it's only enough to cultivate the divine battle domain? Su Qin muttered to himself. A supreme expert could even shatter space with a raise of his hand, let alone a domain. No matter how powerful the War God domain was, could it be stronger than the omnipresent space? Since that was the case, why was the supreme expert Ho Yuan so obsessed with the Battle God Catalog? Let's start cultivating. Su Qin thought for a moment and made a decision in his heart. Although he had a deep understanding of the Battle God Catalog through the system's infusion, he couldn't determine the true upper limit of the Battle God domain due to the lack of comparison. However, cultivating the Battle God domain isn't something that can be done with hard work. It also requires space crystals. Su Qin frowned. Space crystals were the main material for refining spatial magic treasures. They existed in the layers of the void and only supreme experts had a chance of obtaining them. This War God Temple was refined by the supreme expert, Ho Yuan, using a space crystal the size of a small mountain. Although I've refined this war god temple, I can't destroy it, let alone extract the space crystals inside. Su Qin's gaze turned and looked at the majestic palace that was constantly bobbing up and down in his palm. Do I have to make a trip to the immortal sect? Su Qin's thoughts fluctuated as he thought silently. There were orthodoxies left behind by supreme experts in the immortal sect. These orthodoxies must have hidden space crystals left behind by supreme experts. After all, space crystals weren't too precious to the supreme experts. They just needed to break through space in the market and collect them in the depths of the void. However, although Su Qin was certain that there were space crystals in the immortal sect, those space crystals weren't something that Su Qin could take away. Suddenly, Su Qin's heart stirred and a small dark yellow gourd appeared in front of him. This small gourd floated in the void and spun, faintly emitting the aura of space. Void gourd. It was the spatial magic treasure that Su Qin signed in at the stargazing tower in the palace. The space contained in this void gourd was the size of a hall. Although it was still far from being comparable to the Battle God catalog, it was still considered a top-grade spatial magic treasure. Although Su Qin couldn't destroy the Battle God temple, he didn't take this palm-sized void gourd seriously. Now that I have the Battle God temple, I won't be lacking spatial magic treasures for a long time in the future. I won't need this void gourd either, so I might as well take out the space crystals inside to cultivate the Battle God catalog. Su Qin raised his right hand, held the demon god's blade, and stood gently on the void gourd. The void gourd vibrated continuously and actually blocked Su Qin's blade. Block. However, as Su Qin continued to slash, cracks gradually appeared on the surface of the void gourd. And within these cracks, sparkling light spots floated out. Su Qin looked at these light dots, as if he was looking at one space after another. These are the space crystals? Su Qin was shocked. These sparkling and translucent light spots were naturally not complete space crystals. They were just fragments of space crystals, but for Su Qin, it was enough. Battle God Domain. Su Qin took a deep breath and slowly transformed the domain according to the Battle God catalog. Buzz. Just as Su Qin was immersed in cultivating the Battle God domain, Su Qin's phenomenal success stage domain actually expanded on its own. However, Su Qin's phenomenal success stage domain didn't directly cover a radius of a few hundred miles. Instead, it condensed within 100 meters around him. One after another, the space crystal fragments continued to pour into Su Qin's domain. As the space crystal fragments merged, Su Qin's domain became deeper and deeper. It bloomed with layers of light, and there seemed to be a world condensing inside. If one took a closer look, they would discover that the vast land was slowly condensing. Countless auras kept appearing, increasing in number, making this world more and more real. If other Earth immortals saw this scene, they would definitely be dumbfounded. Creating a world. This was a heaven-defying technique that only supreme experts who had broken through the void could use. Moreover, even supreme experts had to break through the void and borrow the power from the depths of the void to create a world. Even so, supreme experts could only create a space. They had to draw in a large amount of essence qi, spiritual vigor, and nomological Tao from the human world to gradually take shape. However, Su Qin was able to create a world in his own domain. Although the current world was extremely illusory and couldn't even compare to the layers of illusions on the 3,000 illusion islands, since there was a beginning, as long as Su Qin continued, there would be a day when he would evolve a real world in his own domain. So this is the Battle God domain. After a long time, Su Qin opened his eyes with a hint of shock on his face. In the process of cultivating the War God catalog, how could Su Qin not know the changes in his domain? Creating a world with his own strength. This was a scene that many martial artists dreamed of. Even those Earth immortals at the peak of the divine ruin realm were far from being able to do it. This was already stepping into the true authority of an immortal god. It's a pity that I don't have enough space crystals. Su Qin was overwhelmed with emotions, but in the end he shook his head slightly. The cultivation of the Battle God catalog not only requires a large amount of space crystals, but it also consumes my physical body's qi, blood, and dermic powers. Su Qin sat cross-legged and carefully recalled the changes in his body during the cultivation. If the end of the cultivation of the Battle God catalog is to create a world within one's own domain, then the formation of a world not only requires sufficient space but also boundless energy. Su Qin thought silently. In just a short moment, he had already consumed 10% of his qi and blood. This was under the premise that the Golden Crow divine body was rich in qi and blood. Otherwise, if he was an ordinary spirit severing stage Earth immortal, his qi and blood would have been drained long ago. Looks like I have to prepare enough divine pills and spirit liquids to replenish my qi and blood when I cultivate the Battle God catalog next time. Su Qin thought. However, my current domain is more than 10 times stronger than before. Su Qin felt his domain and a smile appeared on his face. Even for Su Qin, making the domain evolve into a complete world was an unattainable goal. Not to mention the huge need for space crystals, just the supply of qi, blood, and dermic powers was enough to give Su Qin a headache. From a certain point of view, it was even more difficult than the Great Sun portrait. However, at this moment, the changes in his domain were real. It was an improvement that Su Qin could feel immediately. In terms of mastery of heaven and earth, it's 10 times stronger than an ordinary phenomenal domain. Even if I encounter a true realm Earth immortal, he will be suppressed by my domain immediately and can only unleash 60% of his strength. Su Qin nodded slightly, extremely satisfied. One had to know that in a battle between Earth immortals, the increase or decrease of one's strength was enough to affect the outcome of the battle, let alone being suppressed by 40%. Other than that, if I use my domain to envelop myself, I will completely conceal all my aura. This is a bit like the supreme expert's all dharma vanishes, karma does not touch. Su Qin thought to himself. Although his current domain had only slightly evolved the shadow of a world, which was thousands of miles away from the real world, even if it was only the shadow of a world, it made Su Qin feel as if he was in another dimension. Whether it was scanning with the power of the primordial spirit or covering with the domain, none of them could detect Su Qin at all. This was because under the cover of his own domain, to be precise, Su Qin was no longer in the human world. Whether it was the power of the primordial spirit or the domain, they could only envelop the space of the human world. For Su Qin, who was no longer in the human world, there was naturally nothing they could do. In a flash, Su Qin's thoughts spun rapidly and he was in a good mood. This method was simply crushing all the aura concealment secret techniques in the world. One had to know that even the strongest aura concealment secret technique could only conceal one's own aura. However, one was still there and had not disappeared. There was still the possibility of being discovered. However, if Su Qin used the War God domain to conceal himself, it was equivalent to being completely independent of this space. Of course, if Su Qin made a move, he would naturally be able to escape from this state and return to the human world. Even so, this was an extremely incredible method. It's very difficult for the War God catalog to improve in a short period of time. Next, it's time to break through and enter the true realm. After Su Qin felt the changes in his body again, his mind slowly calmed down and he prepared to completely enter the true realm. In fact, long before Su Qin left Thunder God Island and went to Kunlun Mountain, he was already at the peak of the spirit-severing realm and was half a step into the true realm. Now, after the accumulation of experience on the 3,000 fantasy islands, stepping into the true realm was as simple as eating and drinking. Just as Su Qin was about to break through and enter the true realm, the Earth Immortal Realm. After Taiyin Fairy walked around the palace, she returned to the East Palace and stood quietly outside the Right Spring Square, waiting for Su Qin to summon her. "How should I address you, Fairy?" The old man, Fei Yu, and the Lao Dao cultivator from the Daoism sect asked tentatively. Although Taiyin Fairy's aura was restrained, the old man, Fei Yu, could still feel the aura that surpassed the myth realm that Taiyin Fairy unintentionally revealed. "You can call me Taiyin," Taiyin Fairy said. Every generation of saintess-to-be in the Taiyin Holy Land, no matter what their previous name was, after becoming a saintess-to-be, they would all be called Taiyin. "We're all working for Master." You don't have to treat me as an outsider, Taiyin Fairy said softly. She didn't care about her identity. Since she recognized Su Qin as her master, Taiyin Fairy completely let go of the arrogance in her heart. Taiyin. What a strange name. Yen Hai, who was beside her, blinked and muttered softly. Among the many large sects overseas, none of them had anything to do with Taiyin. Even among the many powerhouses born in the past 1,000 years, none of them had a name or title similar to Taiyin. The Lao Dao cultivator from the Tai Yi sect suddenly narrowed his eyes as if he had thought of something. He immediately cupped his hands at Taiyin Fairy and said, "You've just arrived at the palace, so you must need some time to rest. We'll take our leave now." After saying that, the Lao Dao cultivator from the Dao Yi sect forcefully pulled Yen Hai, who was curious and wanted to ask more, and quickly left the East Palace. Outside the East Palace, Yen Hai looked at the Lao Dao cultivator with a puzzled expression. "Masters Junior, why are you pulling me?" Seeing the strange expression on the Lao Dao cultivator's face, Yen Hai immediately reacted and glanced at the East Palace. "Masters Junior, is that Taiyin not simple?" "It's more than simple." The old man, Fei Yu, gulped. There was still a trace of fear and uneasiness on his face. "Is she really not simple?" Yen Hai's expression became serious. The old man, Fei Yu, was a pinnacle legend and had followed Su Qin for a long time. To be able to make him so frightened, it was obvious that the woman named Tin had a great background. You guessed it too. The Lao Dao cultivator saw the old man's expression and smiled bitterly. As the Lao Dao cultivator spoke, his tone was filled with disbelief and incredulity. The old man, Fei Yu, shook his head and finally said, "I'm afraid that master strength is not only unparalleled in history, but also able to compete with that place." After listening for a long time, Yen Hai finally couldn't help but ask, "Masters Junior, what are you talking about?" The Lao Dao cultivator glanced at Yen Hai. After a moment of silence, he slowly said, "Have you heard of the Immortal sect?" "P.S. I'm ashamed I don't have any today." Chapter 345. Immortal Sect? When Yen Hai heard these two words, he was at a loss at first, but then his expression suddenly changed as if he had thought of something. As a disciple of the Dao Yi sect, even if Yen Hai didn't know the specific information about the Immortal sect, he had read the ancient books passed down from the last Vitality Tide era and had more or less seen the words Immortal sect. The woman named Taiyin just now, is she related to the Immortal sect? Yen Hai reacted very quickly and immediately thought of Taiyin Fairy. He couldn't help but ask. More than related. The old man Fei Yu smiled bitterly. His expression was still full of shock. In the last Vitality Tide era, there was a strong person named Taiyin, who passed down a sacred ground called the Sacred Ground of Taiyin. Since then, every prospective saintess in the sacred ground was named Taiyin, the old man Fei Yu said slowly. Even if thousands of years had passed, the legends about the strong were still recorded in the ancient books of the major sections. Among them, the strong Taiyin was even more dazzling. If it wasn't for the strong Taiyin at the end, the final result of the battle between the human world and the cave world might not have been the winner. Taiyin's sacred ground? Yen Hai was still immersed in shock, while Ruanqing next to him was confused and said, "You mean, Master kidnapped the prospective saintess of the Taiyin sacred ground?" Ruanqing was just a rogue cultivator overseas, so he naturally didn't know the status of the Immortal sect and what kind of existence the Taiyin sacred ground was. He just simply said the important information in the old man Fei Yu's words. As soon as Ruanqing finished speaking, the old man Fei Yu and the Lao Dao were silent. Their thoughts were similar to Ruanqing's, but they didn't dare to say it as casually as Ruanqing. That was the Taiyin sacred ground, a sacred ground that dominated the Vitality Tide era. How noble was the prospective saintess? It was far beyond the ordinary land immortals, but now? The prospective saintess of the Taiyin sacred ground, who was expected to become a real saintess or even a sacred lord in the future, had actually become Su Qin's servant? If this spread out, it would definitely cause a huge uproar, and even the entire Immortal sect would be shaken. Could it be that we got the wrong person? Just the same name? Yen Hai finally struggled out of his shock and asked tentatively. Although the two words Great Moon were incomparably heavy, it was one of the most dazzling existences in the previous Vitality Tide era. However, there were millions of living beings in the world, and it was only a name. It was very likely that there would be someone with the same name. Same name? If she were an ordinary person, it would be possible. But that woman just now, even if she had been restraining her aura, she could still suppress us with a raise of her hand. Obviously, she has far surpassed the pinnacle of the myth realm. I'm afraid that she has stepped into the earth immortal realm like you, my lord. An earth god stage martial artist who has never appeared before, also known as Tai Yin? How can this be a coincidence? The old man Fei Yu shook his head and said, if it was just an ordinary person or even a legend, they might use the name Tai Yin without authorization because of their ignorance. But the existence at the level of earth immortals, which one of them was a fool. How could he not know what the word Greaten meant? No matter how bold an earth immortal was, he wouldn't dare to do this to an omnipotent expert. This was not only because of the huge gap in strength, but also because of the respect for the seniors who walked at the end of the martial Dao. If it weren't for the omnipotent expert Tai Yin and other omnipotent experts resisting the invasion of the cave world back then, the entire human world would have been reduced to the devil race's back garden at this moment. My lord's means are really comparable to an immortal god. After a long time, the old man Fei Yu sighed softly. He was shocked and felt that submitting to Su Qin was the best decision he had made in his life. At the same time, inside the immortal gate, in a palace that floated under the firmament, 6 figures were sitting cross-legged. These 6 figures, just sitting there, faintly made the void stop. A terrifying sense of oppression shrouded the world. Ordinary earth immortals who had just entered the spirit-severing stage wouldn't even dare to think of resisting in front of these 6 figures. We disciples of the Holy Land have inexplicably fallen in the human world. This matter must be thoroughly investigated. A man in a green robe said slowly. With every word he spoke, a gentle breeze blew slowly in the void. In a trance, it was as if a destructive wind was brewing. This man in green was the Valley Master of the Wind God Valley, one of the 6 great holy lands of the immortal sects. He was an earth immortal at the peak of the Wind God ruins. Of course, we must investigate thoroughly. But how should we investigate thoroughly? Now that the situation in the human world is unclear, and our disciples have inexplicably died, do we continue to send disciples to the human world? The sacred master of the great beginning Holy Land said in a booming voice. Among the 6 great holy lands of the immortal sects, the great beginning Holy Land specialized in the physical body. Every earth immortal of the great beginning Holy Land had an extremely powerful physical body, surpassing the Dharma body of an ordinary earth immortal. That's right. Under the circumstances where the situation in the human world is unclear, we shouldn't continue to send disciples, the sacred master of Tai Yin said slowly. Although the life fire of Tai Yin Fairy was still burning and Tai Yin Fairy was not dead, the Tai Yin token of the Tai Yin Holy Land was lost in the human world. In a way, the Tai Yin Holy Land had suffered the greatest loss. The value of the Tai Yin token was incomparable to that of an earth immortal at the divine ruin stage. I suggest that we use the Eye of the Demon God to observe the human world, the Mountain Master of the Sky Blade Mountain said at this moment. The so-called Eye of the Demon God was not the real Eye of the Demon God. It was a treasure that was refined by the supreme powerhouses tens of thousands of years ago by imitating the opening of the demon god's eyes. In the previous era of the Vitality Tide, when the countless demons of the cave world were about to be defeated, a certain demon god in the depths of the world suddenly opened his eyes, and his terrifying gaze swept across everything. Countless human powerhouses fell, and even the strongest powerhouses were seriously injured. After the supreme powerhouses escaped into the immortal sect, they refined an eye-type treasure according to the terrifying gaze of a certain demon god from the depths of the cave world and named it the Eye of the Demon God. The Eye of the Demon God was not a supreme treasure. It did not have any offensive ability, but through the Eye of the Demon God, one could see everything in the world, even the cave world. Of course, even the supreme powerhouses were not willing to use the eye of the demon god to spy on the cave world. The demon god in the depths of the cave world was inconceivable. If they were to attract the attention of the demon god again because of spying, who could bear the consequences? Use the eye of the demon god? The sacred lord of the primeval sacred land frowned slightly. The eye of the demon god was refined by the supreme powerhouses, so it was jointly owned by the 6 sacred lands. As long as one of the sacred lands did not agree, the eye of the demon god could not be used. After all, the eye of the demon god was too terrifying. Under the eye of the demon god, there were basically no secrets in the world. No sacred lord was willing to see all the trump cards of their sacred land exposed to the eye of the demon god. It's just used to see the situation in the human world, the master of the Sky Blade Mountain said calmly. What he meant was that he would not use the eye of the demon god to spy on the secrets of the primeval sacred land. The eye of the demon god is not something that can be used at will. To awaken the eye of the demon god, one needs to consume a lot of vitality and a lot of space power, the sacred land of the primeval sacred land said, shaking his head. Although the space power was everywhere, only the supreme powerhouses could master it. Before the supreme powerhouses died of old age, they would seal some space power and leave it in the sacred land to serve as a foundation. After all, whether it was to awaken the life treasure or to use some other treasures, space power was needed. The other sacred lords also looked hesitant. Although there was still a lot of space power in their sacred land, it was a special power that only the supreme powerhouses could master. Before the next supreme powerhouse was born, every bit of space used was a little bit less. If we don't use the eye of the demon god, do we have to hide in the immortal sect forever? The master of the Sky Blade Mountain sneered. The vitality in the outside world is beginning to recover. If we don't go out, we will most likely miss the critical point of the recovery. You should know very well what we will miss by then. Moreover, we can't take that step out of the immortal sect. As long as we walk out of the immortal sect and feel the great Tao of the real world, we can break through the void and become a supreme powerhouse. The master of the Sky Blade Mountain said slowly. As soon as he said that, the faces of the sacred lords changed. Although the small world of the immortal sect was created by the supreme powerhouses, it could not be compared to a great world like the human world. The sacred lords present were all earth immortals at the peak of the divine ruin realm. To them, their only goal was to improve. Then let's use the eye of the demon god, the Grand In's sacred lord said slowly after pondering for a long time. This time, even the primeval sacred lord did not object. It was obvious that he agreed. Using the eye of the demon god would consume space power. However, if they did not use the eye of the demon god, their space power would be used up sooner or later. It was just a matter of time. The real solution was to give birth to another supreme powerhouse. However, to give birth to another supreme powerhouse, there would only be a glimmer of hope if they returned to the human world. In that case, then let's begin. The master of the Sky Blade Mountain looked excited. He took out a token with only a single corner. This incomplete token was extremely mysterious. It floated quietly in the air and emitted an indescribable aura. The other 5 holy lords glanced at each other and also took out a token with only a single corner. As soon as the 6 tokens appeared, they seemed to sense something and quickly gathered together to form a complete token. Rumble. The moment this hexagonal token appeared, a series of rumbles came from above the palace. A vortex began to appear at the highest point and a huge eye appeared in the vortex. Eye of the demon god. When the 6 sacred lords saw this huge eye, they were inexplicably shocked. At this moment, this huge eye was still tightly shut as if it had not opened yet. Let's work together to activate the eye of the demon god. The 6 sacred lords moved their minds and endless primordial chi and spiritual vigor surged toward the huge eye. Other than that, the 6 sacred lords raised their right hands and released traces of space power toward the huge eye. Welcome to Immortal Cultivation Audiobooks, your gateway to the mystical world of Xianxia. Dive into legendary tales of martial arts, spiritual growth, and immortal ascension. Here, we bring you full-length English audiobooks of the best Wuxia and Xianxia stories, from young prodigies to ancient sect wars. Perfect for fans of Against the Gods, Martial World, and tales of demons and gods.